The clock on the kitchen wall said 10 minutes past 4 in the morning, and I was already standing at the stove because that was the rule. Not his rule. The rule. The one that came before him, before me, before either of us were born. Outside the window it was still black, the kind of November black that swallows the barn whole, and I remember pressing my hand flat against the cold glass just to feel something that wasn't the inside of that house. Behind me I heard his boots on the stairs, slow, deliberate, and I knew before he reached the bottom step that I had done something wrong the day before, because in our home, correction always came in the morning before the children woke, while the world was still dark enough to hide it. Before I go any further, I'm Anna. I grew up old order Amish, and I was a wife in that world for the better part of 40 years before I finally walked out the lane and never looked back. This is Hannah the Amish Girl, the channel where we say out loud the things we were taught to swallow. If there is any part of you that needs to hear the truth about Amish life from a woman who actually lived inside it, subscribe to this channel and tap the like button. And tell me in the comments, when you hear the word obedience, what is the first thing that rises up in you? I was married in the autumn of 1951. I was 19 years old. By the year I want to tell you about, 1957, I had been a wife for 6 years. I had borne 3 children, and I had learned the shape of a man's silence the way you learn weather. You feel it coming in your knees before the sky ever changes. Here is what people who did not grow up the way I did cannot understand. In our world, in those years, a husband was not simply a partner. He was the head. That word was not a metaphor. The bishop preached it from hard benches. The ordnung enforced it, and every mother handed it down to every daughter like a recipe. A wife yields. A husband leads. And when a wife failed to yield, when she was what they called eigensinnig, willful, stubborn, full of her own mind, it was understood quietly, without anyone ever writing it down, that her husband was permitted to bring her back into line, however he saw fit. Nobody ever said the word punishment out loud. We had gentler words, correction, discipline, setting things right. The bishop called it the loving authority of the home. My own mother, the week before my wedding, took my hands in hers in the garden and told me only this: a good wife never lets her husband have a reason. She did not explain what would happen if I gave him one. She thought she was protecting me. I have come to understand that she was simply passing down the only map she had ever been given, and it was a map drawn entirely in fear. Let me tell you about my husband. I am not going to give you his name. He has descendants who are innocent, and the dead deserve a little mercy even when they did not give any. He was not, on the outside, a hard man. At the Sunday singings before we married, he was gentle, almost shy. He carved a small wooden box for me during our courtship, and I kept that box for years, long after I understood what kind of man had made it. People in the district thought well of him. He was respected. He paid his debts, and he kept his fences mended, and he never raised his voice in front of company. That is the part that the world outside never believes. The men who do these things are very often the same men everyone calls good. The first time I had burned the bread, that is all. I had stayed too long with my sister, who was sick that winter with her lungs, and I came home late, and the loaves came out dark and hard. He did not yell. He set his hat on the peg, and he looked at the bread on the table for a long moment, And then he looked at me, and he said very quietly that a wife who could not keep her own house had too much freedom in it. That night he took something away, a small thing. He decided I would no longer visit my sister without his leave. That was the first wall. They always started small, the walls. You did not notice the house getting smaller until you reached out one day and could not find the door. By 1957, the walls had multiplied. I want you to understand the kind of authority a man held in that time and place, because it was not only his fists, and it was not only his voice, it was everything. He controlled the money entirely. Every coin from the milk check, every dollar from the eggs I gathered with my own hands passed through him and came back to me only in the amounts he chose. He controlled where I went, and a wife who left the farm without her husband's knowing was a wife who would answer for it. He controlled who I spoke to. When he decided my friendship with a woman named Lydia 2 farms over had made me too bold, too full of opinions, he simply forbade it, and Lydia and I never spoke again in that life. He controlled my own body in the plainest sense. That a wife could refuse her husband nothing was not even a question anyone thought to ask. And when none of that was enough, when I was still too much myself, there was the rest. I am going to choose my words here with great care, because some of you watching are still inside walls of your own, and I will not put pictures in your mind that you did not ask for. But I will not lie to you either, because the lie is the whole reason this went on for as long as it did, in so many homes, for so many women. There were the long silences that could last a week, where I was made invisible in my own kitchen, spoken through as if I were furniture, until I broke and apologized for sins I could not always name. There was the cold, being sent to sleep apart in the unheated room, in the deep of winter to think on my willfulness. There was the counting. He kept account of my failings the way other men kept account of seed corn, and on certain mornings he would read the account back to me. And there was the hand when the account grew too long. What happened over the next 11 Sundays? I cannot carry it in 20 minutes. There are things this recording cannot hold. The names, the counting, the drawer, the dress I kept for 27 years. 3 years ago, I wrote it all down. The book is called The Sundays. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. I want to come back now to the year and to why I keep saying 1957, because the year matters more than you might think. In 1957, there was no number a woman like me could call. The idea that the outside law had any business inside an Amish marriage would have been laughed at on both sides of the fence. The English did not interfere with the plain people, and the plain people did not bring their troubles to the English. A woman in my position had exactly 3 doors, and her husband or her bishop held the key to every one of them. She could go to the ministers, who would counsel her to submit more fully and search her own heart for the pride that had provoked him. She could go to her own mother, who had survived her own marriage by the same yielding, and would tell her to do likewise. Or she could leave and lose her children, her family, her church, her God as she understood him, and every soul she had ever loved, all in a single afternoon. That was the choice. Submit, endure, or lose everything. Most women I knew chose to endure, and they called it faith, because it was the only word they had that made the enduring bearable. I want to tell you about a woman named Barbara, because I do not want you to think this was only my story. Barbara was older than me, married into the district from Ohio, and she had a way of going very still and very quiet that I recognized only years later, because I had learned to do it too. One spring she came to a quilting with a stiffness in how she sat down, and when the older women saw it, not one of them said a word. They simply made room for her and poured her coffee and let her rest her hands. That was the whole of the help we were allowed to give one another: a chair, a cup, a silence that said, "I know, and I cannot say it either." We carried each other in that silence. It was the only carrying the world permitted us. Barbara is gone now. She never left. I think about her more than I think about almost anyone. For a long time after I left, I could not understand why I had stayed as long as I did. People on the outside ask it without meaning to be cruel. Why didn't you just go? And I had no answer for them, because the question is built on a freedom I did not possess. In the therapy I found years later, a kind woman gave me language I had never owned. She taught me the word coercion and the word isolation, and she explained to me gently over many months that a cage does not need bars if it has taken away every place you could possibly run to. She told me something I have carried every single day since. She said, "Control is rarely the raised hand. The raised hand is only the last thing. Control is everything that came before it, all the small doors quietly locked, until the raised hand is barely even necessary, because by then the woman has learned to correct herself." That undid me when she said it, because she was right. By the end, he hardly had to do anything at all. I had become my own warden. I disciplined myself before he ever could. I had so fully taken his voice inside me that I no longer needed him to speak it. That is the deepest thing that was done to me, deeper than any cold room or any long silence. They took my own mind and turned it against me, and they called the result a virtuous wife. And yet, I have to tell you the part that is hardest to hold, because it is true alongside all the rest. That world was not only this. There were mornings of real beauty. There was the smell of the whole district's bread baking before a wedding. There were my children's faces in the lamplight. There was a kind of belonging so total that I have never once found its equal out here in the wide and lonely freedom of the English world, and I will not pretend I do not miss it, because I do, even now, even knowing everything. The cruelty and the belonging grew in the very same soil. That is the thing nobody warns you about. You do not get to grieve only the bad. You have to grieve all of it together, the whole field, the wheat and the thorns in one harvest, and that grieving has taken me the rest of my life. I left in my 60th year. I was not a young woman fleeing into possibility. I was old and tired, and I walked out the lane with one bag because I had decided, finally, that I would rather be free and alone for whatever years I had left than die having never once belonged to myself. The shunning came as I knew it would. The letters returned unopened. The grandchildren I am not permitted to know. I will carry that loss into my grave, but I will carry it as a free woman. And there were decades when I could not have said that, and so I count it as worth the cost. If you grew up in a place where your fear was called obedience, where the locking of every door was called love, I see you. If a good man, a respected man, a man everyone admired, did things behind your closed door that you have never once been able to say out loud, I see you. And I want you to hear an old woman tell you plainly that what was done to you was not God, and it was not your portion, and it was not deserved. You were not too willful. You were never too much. You were simply a woman who still had a self left in her, and they mistook that self for a sin. The Sunday Sein, what 20 minutes cannot hold. The link is in the description and the pinned comment. The morning is yours if you decide it is.